With the term regenerative agriculture continuing to grow in popularity, it appears that you as the consumer are in a conundrum. Currently labeled as the optimal approach for environmental health, many companies are picking up on the demand for regeneratively raised products and getting in the game. Here's the question. Are they fundamentally on board or just greenwashing you into their products? Let's expose some truths. As a regenerative rancher, I've already reached the point where I'm hesitant about using the term regenerative. Overused and now potentially abused, has the time come for consumers to be cautious when they see this term rather than excited about the quality of the product that they're purchasing? Corporate interests being considered, greenwashing is a real factor and maybe to your detriment. I'll explain. But before I do, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Arland Hill, an inquisitive rancher that helps individuals reconnect with the nutrient-rich foods to improve their health in weeks, not months. What is greenwashing? Well, think about brainwashing as we talk about this. Its origins are in getting you to think differently based on what you see on a label or what you see being promoted by a company or an organization. In many ways, it can be deceptive, and that's what we're going to talk about and delve into. And this is not something that is new, but it's something that is far more prevalent now than it has been in the past. Recently, we've seen companies pick up regenerative ag initiatives that we wouldn't anticipate to be doing this. Companies like McDonald's and Target, Cargill, Nestle. These are names that you've heard. But these four companies are by no means the only companies out there that have developed initiatives around regenerative agriculture. As I said in my introduction, regenerative agriculture has picked up a lot of popularity of recent, and companies are noting that fact, which means that they're getting on the bandwagon and looking to support this term. But are they really supporting the practice? That's a different statement. And that's what we're going to explore here. Now, as we start off on this, understand that there are some dichotomies that we absolutely have to acknowledge and that you can't overlook in this conversation. The first of which is economics versus the environment. When you look at, let's just say, for example, many of these companies that I referenced here, these companies, they're on the New York Stock Exchange. You can go buy stock for these companies, which means that they have shareholders, which means that profit is a driving, motivating factor. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important to those shareholders is making money. It's not about the environment. Now, it doesn't mean that the two that the two have to be completely malaligned with each other. And it doesn't mean that in any way that I'm against anything capitalistic, because I'm not. I'm very much a free market individual. But it just means that many times decisions are made in favor of economics at the expense of environment. But environment is not the only, economics environment is not the only dichotomy here. We also have the dichotomy between economics and nutrition. Nutritional quality, nutritional value, nutritional density, however you prefer to say that. And what we've seen, just as an example, over the past years, many years now, even decades at this point, is that nutritional value has continued to decline as economics have continued to improve for these companies. So you have to look at it and acknowledge that there is a discrepancy between historically what these companies have focused on and what their endpoints or end goals have been. Now, as we look at many of these companies out there that are getting on board with using the term regenerative agriculture and that are putting their name behind the regenerative agriculture movement, we want to ask, what are these companies focusing on? Well, when you go to the websites of many of these companies, what you'll find is that there's a hyper focus on terms based around climate change. And that's at the expense or the just avoidance of looking at nutrition. Nutrition should remain a focus here as well. After all, why do we take these efforts towards regenerative agriculture and towards the food that's being produced? It's ultimately so that a better product is being produced. Yes, it's great that there is positive environmental impact here, but that shouldn't be where the conversation ends at, and unfortunately, that is where it ends at. After all, guys, we're talking about food. Nutrition and food are one and the same. If you're not getting nutrition from food, what are we doing? What does it matter if it's regenerative agriculture or organic or sustainable or any other buzz term you want to use? All that matters is that we get an adequate amount of nutrient density in the food that we're consuming. And I also want to point out, we're talking about regenerative agriculture in this video, but I want you to make note of something here, in that all terms suffer from greenwashing, not just regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is just our topic today, but organic, sustainable, grass-fed, grass-finished, pasture-raised, these are all terms that are being used more aggressively by companies out there that really are probably not translating to what you think they are for you as the consumer. So let me give an example on this. Let me go back to one of the other terms outside of regenerative agriculture, which is organic. Organic has been around for decades now. Back from the 40s and 50s is when that term began to pick up popularity and began to be acknowledged in terms of how people were practicing in raising, whether it was raising plant-based foods or animal-based foods. So there's a track record here. And what we've seen is that when organic really started to get momentum, that many companies jumped on their products having an organic option of their products. But what we've also seen is that to some companies' credits, while they have continued to stand behind the organic option, we also see that other companies don't give any credibility towards organic anymore. It's not as in favor, it's not as big of a buzz as it was at one time. So many companies are not staying with that, which when you look at delivering a food, why wouldn't you stay with organic? Even if it's not the hot buzz term right now, why wouldn't you stay with that? Because it's still equally as important. So that raises some red flags. And it starts to get you in this mindset of thinking that companies are almost giving you this lip service around, believe us, believe what we put on our labels and on our website, because we're the good guys. And as long as we use these terms, we're the good guys that are doing things right. Well, again, regenerative ag, whether you're using that term or not, for myself as a producer, I still use it. But as I told you, I've become much more inquisitive and really reflective on how I use this term, because it already starts to feel like it's getting overplayed to me, and it's becoming much more of a bandwagon type term. So when you think about that, that should lead us to the point of asking some questions of the companies that are using this terminology. And for one, the first thing that I would personally ask is that if you see so much value in this regenerative agriculture movement, why were you not taking action prior? Why were you not taking environmentally stewarding steps prior to regenerative agriculture becoming into the mainstream? And further, that's looking in the past, right? And so the past is the past. You can't do anything about it. But the future we have control over. And so what about your future projections for these companies? What concrete plans do you have in place to continue to support regenerative agriculture over the long term? Not just for the next year or even 5 years. What is your long-term projection of how you're going to continue to do that? And make it to where regenerative agriculture is not just another buzz term that your marketing department got behind and is trying to run with. And frankly, when you look at this from a corporate standpoint, you also have to ask, Well, what targeted endpoints do you have? Is it just the environment? Is it just the climate change because it's cool to be green right now and you want to greenwash me into thinking that I need to get on the green wagon as well? Okay, I'm a fan of the environment and being stewarding the environment appropriately. However, that's not where this conversation ends at. If that is your only targeted endpoint, that's a miss. What about nutrition? What about the community? What about the farmers and their livelihood? How about those endpoints? Those things matter. And if these things matter to you, then what metrics do you have in place to validate the activity that your company is doing to support these things? Right? And so I'm not necessarily suggesting that every company by any means has to get behind this or that we should have any forced initiatives. That's nonsense. That's communism. I'm not into communism. But if you're going to put yourself out there as being a steward and being a fan of regenerative agriculture and supporting regenerative agriculture, if you took that step forward, then step up and show us how you're doing that as a company and how you're going to do it for a long haul with all perspectives of regenerative agriculture in mind, all perspectives of just agriculture, not even regenerative agriculture, but just all aspects of agriculture, which again go back to nutrition, community, the farmers, the people working in this industry. How are the things that you're doing as a corporation supporting all of that? And if there's also the question of, is this something, if you're a business that has your own farms, is this something that you're doing on your farm, your corporate farms? And is there some direct oversight on those corporate farms to make sure you're staying compliant and that consumers can trust in that? Or is this something that the food that you're producing, is it being outsourced and brought into your corporation? And how are you validating compliance even though you're using these terms on your labels? Right, so these are all questions that companies should be straightforward about and should be able to answer. And for you as the consumer, and I have a couple of things for you here. First of all, don't put faith in terms, especially unregulated terms. Regenerative agriculture is not a regulated term. And this is where you as the consumer need to develop relationships with your food supplier. But two, I have two other areas for you as the consumer. So one is within this greenwashing mindset is that small companies, as I look at this, are at an increased risk of being violators of greenwashing, of trying to greenwash you into their way of thinking. And the reason is that, one, they lack public visibility. They don't have the same eyes on them that smaller companies do. So smaller companies can toss these terms out there, and if they get dinged, there's not going to be the mass lashback on that would come towards a small company who may just offend a few people in a small sector. So ultimately, again, we're talking business here. You have fewer dollars at risk. Small companies aren't answering to shareholders, so they don't have that constant financial burden, if you will. Maybe that's not the right way to say that, but they don't have that constant financial pressure. And obviously, small companies still have to make money as well, but it's generally if they do something out of line, they're not going to feel the same pressure and effects that a large company will. We're not talking about losing millions and millions of dollars most of the time with small companies. And the other thing that I've noticed as a trend on this is products and companies that tend to be promoted by influencers, in my opinion, are definitely one of the ones that are some of the companies that you should be on guard against. And I'm not saying that to suggest that all are bad. I'm suggesting that you as the consumer, you need to do your homework. Because many times influencers are just as guilty as trying to bring in revenue without giving forethought to what the downstream effects of that are. For example, we're talking food here. Is there a nutritional component to it? What's the effect on the producers of that food? These are all things that should at least be some consideration, and to make sure that if you're going to get behind buying a product that's using the term regenerative agriculture, that the people that are actually running that company are truly behind regenerative agriculture if you want to see it for the long term. and about that long term. This is the other area that you as the consumer need to be thinking about. What is the longevity of these initiatives from these companies? Good today, but is it going to be good tomorrow? What are their future practices? And I think it's also worth noting on this, and I would be interested even to ask this question of many of these companies and their marketing departments and the heads of these marketing departments that are using these greenwashing tactics is, tell me about regenerative agriculture. What is the value of regenerative agriculture? You should be able, if you're going to use that marketing, if you're going to use that on labels and in your media, you should be able to convey to the consumer what the value of regenerative agriculture is. Regenerative agriculture is deeply entwined in soil health. It's entwined, it's integrated, it focuses on the health of the soil. And just to illustrate this point, I want to go back to what are the things that regenerative agriculture focuses on. It focuses on the context of the situation that the agriculture is taking place in. It focuses on covering the soil with plants and minimizing soil disturbance, increasing diversity, maintaining continuous living plants and roots, and integrating livestock. Now, many of you would look at that and go, well, where's the conversation about nutrition? Where's the conversation about community and the getting the food, the chemical free, the avoidance, all the things that are supported around sustainable and organic? Aren't those things important too? Of course they are. So just to hyper focus on regenerative agriculture without giving acknowledgement to these other areas should make you as the consumer raise a red flag. It should give you pause and make you ask questions. So here's my final word for you as the consumer. Favor local over commercial, where you can ask questions, where you're not going to get greenwashed. Small commercial companies, be suspicious. I'm not telling you not to buy products from these guys at all. Some of these channels can be trustworthy, but some of them are not trustworthy. And for you as the consumer, you can't go in with blind faith. You have to do your due diligence. Large commercial companies, you can monitor their track record over time and hope that they follow through with these initiatives over time. And you can also look at them historically and see what they've gotten behind, why they've gotten behind these movements in the past, and did they stick with them? Or when that terminology related to that movement fell out of favor, did they also move away from that terminology as well? And again, keep in mind what these regenerative agriculture principles are and what you're actually getting when you buy regenerative agriculture. Chances are for you as the consumer, regenerative agriculture may only be part of what you're looking for. There may be some other facets of your food, like the organic, like the sustainable, that you may be equally interested in and seeking out. Now, I realize that some of you may feel overwhelmed by this and think, I'm still trying to figure out the difference between regenerative and organic and which one of those two to buy. Well, listen, you're not alone. And here's a video that breaks down the difference and makes your purchasing decisions much easier.